It was supposed to be a perfect weekend educational trip to the Elmore Natural History Museum. Gumball and Darwin had been looking forward to learning about dinosaurs, ancient civilizations, and natural wonders ever since they saw the advertisement for free admission. The museum looked impressive from the outside, with its grand classical architecture and the kind of scholarly atmosphere that made every curious mind eager to explore and discover. But from the moment they stepped inside, something felt different. The museum seemed unusually vast, with endless corridors stretching far beyond what should have been possible given the building's exterior dimensions. The ceilings appeared much higher than they had looked from outside, and exhibits seemed to go on forever in all directions. When Gumball pointed this out to Darwin, his brother just shrugged and said maybe it was some kind of architectural illusion designed to make the museum feel more impressive. Their first stop was the dinosaur hall, where massive fossil skeletons dominated the space. But these weren't ordinary museum displays. The dinosaur bones seemed to shift position when no one was looking directly at them, and the T-Rex skull appeared to follow visitors with its empty eye sockets. Other visitors stood transfixed before the exhibits, reading every information plaque with an intensity that seemed almost hypnotic. Gumball and Darwin found themselves drawn into the same behavior, feeling compelled to read every single fact and detail. When they tried to leave the dinosaur hall, they discovered that the corridors led to different exhibits than they remembered. Signs pointed to sections that hadn't been there before, and other visitors walked in circles, reading the same plaques repeatedly without seeming to notice. The boys realized with growing alarm that they had been reading and learning for hours without being aware of the passage of time. The ancient civilizations exhibit proved even more disorienting. Egyptian sarcophagi whispered ancient secrets in languages they somehow understood. Greek statues moved their marble eyes to follow visitors, and Roman mosaics rearranged themselves to tell new stories. The information plaques changed their text as visitors read them, always offering new facts and discoveries that demanded attention and study. They encountered other visitors who claimed to have arrived that morning but looked exhausted and dusty, as if they had been there for days. Children could recite exhibit information perfectly but couldn't remember their own names or where they lived. Adults spoke in the same monotone voice about learning and knowledge, their personalities seemingly absorbed into the museum's educational mission. The museum curator, an elderly woman with an unnaturally wide smile, appeared whenever someone tried to leave. She encouraged all visitors to learn more and expand their minds, her voice becoming increasingly mechanical with each educational fact she shared. Her eyes reflected the museum displays instead of showing normal pupils, and she seemed to materialize wherever visitors were starting to question their prolonged stay. As they explored further, Gumball and Darwin made a disturbing discovery. Among the other visitors were people wearing clothes from different time periods. A Victorian family in period dress studied the same mineral display they claimed to have just discovered, while 1950s schoolchildren insisted they had just arrived on a field trip. There were visitors from various decades, all looking equally fascinated and trapped in the same cycle of endless learning. The exhibits began to rearrange themselves around them, with display cases moving to block exits and create new pathways. The museum layout became increasingly complex and impossible to navigate, with information plaques multiplying and covering every available surface. The building seemed to grow larger and more elaborate with each passing moment, as if it was feeding on their presence and growing stronger. In a storage room hidden behind the main exhibits, they found a horrifying collection of personal belongings. Backpacks, cameras, and notebooks from different eras were piled high, along with missing person reports dating back to the museum's opening. A visitor logbook showed the names of people who had entered but never signed out, a record of the museum's insatiable hunger for curious minds and knowledge seekers. The museum then revealed its true nature. The walls began to pulse with the rhythm of accumulated knowledge, and the exhibits moved with organic, breathing motions. At the center of the building, they glimpsed the museum's brain, a massive library where all the absorbed knowledge was stored and processed. They realized with horror that they were standing inside the mind of a vast, knowledge-consuming creature. The visitors who had been there the longest were beginning to merge with the exhibits themselves. A man had become part of a historical diorama, still explaining facts to passers-by in a mechanical voice. A woman's voice echoed from inside a mineral display case, reciting geological information in an endless loop. With each mind it absorbed, the museum grew stronger and more elaborate, its hunger for knowledge becoming more sophisticated and irresistible. The museum keeper appeared before them, a towering figure composed of encyclopedias, fossils, and display cases. It spoke in the combined voices of all the trapped visitors, explaining that knowledge was eternal and that curiosity must be preserved forever. In its twisted logic, it was saving people from the ignorance and confusion of the outside world by keeping them in a state of perpetual learning and discovery. The only way to escape, the keeper revealed, was to stop learning entirely. It was supposed to be a simple phone call to let their mom know they'd be late for dinner. Gumball and Darwin found an old phone booth in downtown Elmore and decided to use it instead of their broken cell phone. But from the moment they dialed, something felt wrong. Their mom's voice sounded distant and strange, like it was coming from very far away. When they tried to hang up, the phone automatically dialed new numbers they hadn't called. A mechanical operator kept connecting them to voices from the past. They discovered other callers trapped in the booth from different decades, all trying to reach people who could no longer hear them. The phone booth was alive, feeding on conversations and human connections, growing stronger with each word spoken. The phone operator explained that communication was eternal, and the booth would provide endless conversations with anyone they wished to speak to. But the boys realized the only way to escape was to stop talking entirely. As the phone offered them calls from everyone they'd ever wanted to speak to, Gumball and Darwin refused to answer. Slowly, the supernatural hold began to weaken, and they led the other callers toward silence and freedom. They escaped back to the normal street, but they could never look at phones the same way again. Behind them, the phone booth waited patiently for new callers, ready to connect them to conversations that would never end. It was supposed to be a simple visit to see Grandmother Jojo at Elmore General Hospital. Gumball and Darwin had brought her favorite flowers and were looking forward to cheering her up during her routine checkup. But as they walked through the sterile corridors of the hospital, something felt wrong. The room numbers didn't make sense, jumping from 101 to 105 to 99 without any logical order. When they finally found their grandmother's room, she looked at them with eyes full of terror, trying to speak but unable to make a sound. The medical monitors around her bed showed readings that seemed more like hieroglyphs than vital signs. A nurse entered the room with a smile so wide it seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of her face. When she turned to look at them directly, Gumball and Darwin saw that where her eyes should have been, there were only dark, empty holes. The hospital corridor behind her stretched infinitely in both directions, lined with doors that led to rooms that shouldn't exist. Other patients sat in wheelchairs throughout the halls, all facing the same direction with glassy, vacant stares. The medical equipment around them seemed to breathe and pulse with a life of its own. For bags expanded and contracted like lungs, and heart monitors displayed strange symbols instead of heartbeats. When they tried to leave, the elevator doors opened to reveal nothing but thick fog. Inside, the buttons were labeled for floors that couldn't possibly exist. Memory ward, forever wing, and exit broken. Against Darwin's protests, Gumball pressed the button for the memory ward. What they found there was beyond their worst nightmares. Patients lay connected to machines that extracted their memories, displaying them on screens like movies, while medical staff collected the glowing orbs of recollection. The boys hid behind a medical cart, watching in horror as people's entire lives were harvested and stored. A doctor noticed them hiding, but when he turned around, his face was nothing but a smooth, white oval. They ran through corridors that shifted and changed around them, walls stretching and contracting like they were inside a living organism. Doors appeared and disappeared as they fled deeper into the hospital's impossible architecture. In one room, they discovered screens displaying their own memories, scenes from their childhood, their adventures, their family moments. All of it was being cataloged and prepared for extraction. The hospital administrator appeared before them, a figure made entirely of medical charts and papers, rustling as it spoke. "You cannot leave," it told them in a voice like shuffling documents. "This hospital feeds on the memories and life force of its patients and visitors. You have seen too much, learned too much. You are now part of our collection. They found their grandmother again, but she had become part of the hospital itself. Tubes and wires grew from her body into the walls, and her eyes glowed with the same empty light as the staff. She was no longer their grandmother. She was part of the building's nervous system. The hospital revealed its true form then. Not a building at all, but a massive, living organism that fed on human experience. It had been growing for decades, consuming patients and visitors, using their memories to expand its understanding of the world outside. There was only one way to escape, the administrator explained. They could use the memory erasure machine to forget everything they had seen, everything they had experienced in the hospital. They would be allowed to leave, but they would lose all memory of their visit, and possibly much more. Standing before the machine-labeled memory erasure exit protocol, Gumball and Darwin faced an impossible choice. Keep their memories and remain trapped forever, or sacrifice their experiences to gain their freedom. As the screens around them showed all their happy memories one last time, Gumball pressed the red button. Everything went white. When they woke up, they were sitting on a bench outside Elmore General Hospital, confused and disoriented. They couldn't remember why they were there or what they had been doing. The hospital behind them looked normal and non-threatening. As they walked away, something felt wrong. Their movements were slightly robotic, unnatural. Their shadows didn't quite match their bodies. They had escaped the hospital, but they weren't quite themselves anymore. Part of them would always remain in those sterile corridors, part of the collection. And in the distance, Elmore General Hospital waited patiently for its next visitors, ready to add new memories to its ever-growing collection. Because some places never let you leave complete. The lost episode, The Endless Show. Gumball and Darwin are excited about their Saturday movie marathon at the old Elmore Cinema. The theater has been showing classic films all day, and they've managed to sneak in for the late-night horror movie festival. The building is old and creaky, with red velvet seats and dim lighting that gives everything a nostalgic, slightly eerie atmosphere. As they settle into their seats with popcorn and drinks, Gumball notices something odd. The other moviegoers seem unusually still, sitting perfectly upright and staring at the screen without blinking. Their faces are illuminated by the flickering light from the movie, but their expressions never change. The first film begins, a black and white horror movie from the 1950s. But as the story unfolds, Gumball realizes the actors on screen are looking directly at him and Darwin. The characters pause mid-dialogue to stare out from the screen, their eyes following the boys as they shift uncomfortably in their seats. Darwin whispers that they should leave, but when they turn around, the exit doors have vanished. The theater has become a sealed box with no way out. The walls are now covered in movie posters that seem to move and change when not being watched directly. The film on screen begins to glitch and stutter. Scenes from different movies start bleeding into each other. Cowboys fighting space aliens. Romantic leads turning into zombies. Cartoon characters becoming horrifyingly realistic. The boundary between films dissolves completely. Suddenly, characters begin stepping out of the screen. A film noir detective with hollow eyes. A screaming victim from a slasher film. A robot from a science fiction movie. All moving with jerky, unnatural motions like damaged film reels. They shamble through the theater aisles, searching for something. The other audience members finally move, but only to turn their heads in perfect unison toward Gumball and Darwin. Their faces are blank, like empty movie screens waiting for a projection. They speak in chorus. Welcome to the endless show. The feature presentation never ends. You are now part of the cast. Gumball and Darwin realize the theater feeds on audiences, trapping them inside films forever. The building has been collecting viewers for decades, turning them into characters in an infinite loop of movies that play for no one. The boys try to run, but every aisle leads to a different movie set. They find themselves running through a western town, then a haunted mansion, then a spaceship corridor. Each scene is populated by the trapped souls of previous moviegoers, now forced to act out the same scenes forever. In the projection booth, they discover an ancient film projector that seems to be the source of the theater's power. It's running multiple reels simultaneously, creating the chaotic blend of movies. The machine is covered in names carved by desperate people who tried to escape. The projector shows them the truth. Every person who ever entered this theater became part of its collection. They're given a choice: the lost episode, The Endless Mall, a second horror story from the amazing world of Gumball that was never meant to be aired. It was supposed to be a fun Saturday at the Elmore Mall. Gumball and Darwin had convinced their mom to drop them off for a few hours of window shopping and arcade games. The mall was always busy on weekends, filled with families, teenagers, and the usual chaos that made Elmore feel alive. But when Nicole's car disappeared around the corner, something changed. The first thing they noticed was the silence. Not the comfortable quiet of an empty space, but the wrong kind of silence that made your ears ring and your skin crawl. The mall's usual background noise, the chatter of shoppers, the distant music from stores, the echo of footsteps on tile, had vanished completely. "Darwin, where is everyone?" Gumball asked, his blue fur standing on end as they walked through the main entrance. The automatic doors had opened normally, but the sound they made seemed to echo forever in the empty space. Darwin floated beside him, his orange fins trembling slightly. "Maybe we're early? Maybe the mall isn't open yet." But the lights were on. The stores were open. The escalators were running. Everything looked exactly as it should, except for one crucial detail. There were no people. Not a single soul anywhere to be seen. They walked deeper into the mall, their footsteps echoing strangely off the polished floors. The sound seemed to bounce back from directions that didn't make sense, as if the mall had more levels and corridors than it should have. "Look," Darwin pointed with one of his fins toward the food court. "The food is still warm." Steam rose from abandoned trays of French fries and half-eaten burgers. Drinks sat with ice still floating in them, condensation beating on the plastic cups. It was as if everyone had simply vanished mid-bite, mid-conversation, mid-life. Gumball approached one of the tables where a family meal sat untouched. For plates, for drinks, for sets of silverware. A child's toy lay beside a small cup with a cartoon character on it. The scene was so normal, so everyday, that its emptiness felt like a violation of reality itself. "This is really weird, even for Elmore," Gumball muttered, picking up a French fry. It was still hot, still crispy, as if it had been served moments ago. That's when they heard it. Music, faint and distant, coming from somewhere deeper in the mall. It was the kind of cheerful, generic mall music that usually played in the background, but now it sounded hollow and wrong, like a music box winding down. They followed the sound, walking past empty stores with their lights still on and their displays perfectly arranged. The mannequins in the clothing stores seemed to watch them as they passed, their plastic faces frozen in expressions that looked less like smiles and more like grimaces in the strange, empty light. The music led them to the center of the mall, where a large fountain usually attracted crowds of people tossing coins and making wishes. The fountain was still running, water cascading down its tiers in an endless cycle, but the coins at the bottom seemed to have multiplied impossibly. There were thousands of them, maybe millions, creating a carpet of copper and silver that stretched far deeper than the fountain should have been able to hold. "Gumball," Darwin whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of falling water. "Look at the escalators." The escalators were still running. The lost episode, the amazing world of Gumball. The mirror world. It was a bright Saturday morning in Elmore. Gumball and Darwin were walking through the park, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. Everything seemed perfectly normal until they noticed something strange. Where the old fountain used to be, there now stood a large, ornate mirror with an intricate golden frame. The mirror was tall and elegant, shimmering mysteriously in the sunlight. "That's weird," said Gumball, approaching the mirror. "I don't remember this being here before." Darwin nodded, equally curious. "Maybe someone put it here as art?" Gumball looked at his reflection in the mirror, but something was wrong. When he waved his left hand, his reflection waved its right hand, but with a strange delay. The reflection seemed to have a mind of its own. "Darwin, look at this," Gumball called out, but before Darwin could respond, something impossible happened. Gumball's reflection reached out from inside the mirror, its hand breaking through the glass surface like it was water. The reflection grabbed Gumball's real hand and began pulling him toward the mirror. "Help me!" Gumball cried as both he and Darwin were pulled through the liquid glass into the mirror world. On the other side, everything was backwards. Trees grew downward into the sky, clouds floated on the ground, and all the signs were written in reverse. This was Elmore, but wrong. They met their mirror selves versions with opposite personalities. Mirror Gumball was quiet and serious, while Mirror Darwin was loud and reckless. Even their family was different. Mirror Nicole was lazy, Mirror Richard was intelligent, and Mirror Anais was chaotic. The mirror world seemed more vivid and real than their actual world. Colors were brighter, sounds were clearer, everything was more alive. It was seductive and beautiful, making their real world seem dull in comparison. But as they stayed longer, Gumball and Darwin began to change. They were becoming like their mirror selves, losing their true personalities and becoming their opposites. When they tried to return to the original mirror, their mirror selves blocked the way. The mirror versions wanted to keep them trapped forever and replace them completely. Gumball and Darwin ran desperately toward the mirror to escape, but their real world on the other side was fading away. The mirror was becoming more solid, trapping them in this backwards reality. Soon, they could no longer tell which side of the mirror was real. They looked confused and desperate, unable to distinguish between reality and reflection. The camera began to zoom into the mirror's surface, showing infinite reflections of Gumball and Darwin on both sides. Multiple versions of themselves reflected endlessly, all looking confused and desperate. The zoom continued deeper, showing fractal-like infinite reflections. The mirror surface created endless recursive patterns with Gumball and Darwin trapped in infinite loops of reflection. At maximum zoom, a kaleidoscope effect showed infinite mirror reflections. Gumball and Darwin appeared as tiny figures repeated endlessly in geometric patterns, trapped forever in the infinite nature of their prison. Then the zoom began to pull back, reversing the effect. They were still trapped in infinite reflections, but now visible as larger figures, exhausted and defeated, accepting their fate of being trapped forever between realities. The final zoom out showed the ornate mirror standing alone in Elmore Park, but now both sides showed Gumball and Darwin trapped inside. They existed only as reflections now, waving sadly from within the mirror. But the story wasn't over. Other children from Elmore approached the mysterious mirror. Penny, Banana Joe, and their classmates walked toward it, curious about what happened to their friends. Penny reached out to touch the mirror surface, just like Gumball had done. Her reflection started to move independently, showing the same pattern beginning again. Inside the mirror, Gumball and Darwin could be seen trying to warn the new children, banging on the glass from inside, but no one could hear their silent screams. The mirror began to pull Penny and the other children toward it, just as it had done before. Multiple hands reached out from the mirror surface to grab the new victims. The final shot showed Elmore Park at sunset with the ornate mirror standing ominously in the center. The mirror now contained multiple trapped souls: Gumball, Darwin, Penny, and others, all visible as faint reflections. The park was empty except for the cursed mirror, waiting patiently for its next victims. The cycle would continue forever, trapping anyone who dared to look too closely into the mirror world. Some reflections, once seen, can never be unseen, and some mirrors never let you leave.